Hello and welcome back into another episode of The Hard Fowl. I'm your host, Pearson Fowler, and with me, as always, staff writer for Gamecock Central, staff writer extraordinaire, Collyn Taylor. We saw each other at the Carolina basketball game on Tuesday. Gave a little fist bump, a little high five, but it was not enough goodwill to propel South Carolina to victory. Maybe we need to come up with a more elaborate kind of secret handshake.
Like secret handshake, Russ Westbrook and Kevin Durant, like Oklahoma City Thunder, like 2011 style.
We might need to do something a little more like that to create a little more goodwill for this basketball team, because it didn't work. South Carolina lost their SEC opener to Florida by 13 points. A very interesting game. Storylines aplenty, which is, good for us. Maybe frustrating for South Carolina fans, because I think it would have been easier to swallow if Florida were just significantly better than South Carolina. And I think leaving this game, you can't really feel any other way than Florida is better than South Carolina right now. But despite the 13-point loss, it still felt like a game that was winnable for South Carolina.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at it, and South Carolina was in the game up until, 2, 3, 4 minutes left. So, yeah, South Carolina competed with them. They were in the game for long stretches of times and even cut it to 2, cut it to 1 late in the second half. It's just Florida had better talent. Andrew Nembhard is, when you look at the head-to-head matchup between him and A.J. Lawson, he's better than A.J. Lawson right now. And that's at some days you just get beat, and that was kind of the thought process. I mean, that's just kind of what happened. And there were things that I think South Carolina could have done to win the game. But at the end of the day, Florida has more talent than South Carolina does right now.
On the one hand, you look at it and you say, well, if you get 18 and 10 out of Mike Kotsar, if you make 75% of your free throws, 18 of 24, including, I think it was like 14 of the first 15 or something like that, those are all recipes for success. So those are things that you wouldn't necessarily count on. And if I told you when we were recording this podcast on, Monday, that Kotsar would have 18 and 10 and Carolina would make 75% of their free throws, you would think that was a recipe for success. But, I mean, you mentioned it right off the bat, and that's kind of where I want to start, because that was the biggest storyline for me. We talked about the Team Canada teammates, and I don't know if Andrew Nembhard is just a better player than A.J. Lawson, period, but he was such a better player on Tuesday. Had his season high in points, 21, shot 8 of 14 from the field, incredibly efficient, 3 of 5 from 3, despite his shot being extremely flat. Like, it looks like it's going to go front iron every time, and it was just swish, swish, swish. Made both of his free throws, and then most impressively, 10 assists, 3 rebounds, 3 steals. Looked like exactly what Carolina fans thought and wanted to see from A.J. Lawson all year. Is Andrew Nembhard, like, I've watched a little bit of Florida, and he's good. That was obviously an outstanding performance. Is he just better than A.J. Lawson, or was he just better than A.J. Lawson on Tuesday?
I think yes to both. I think he's a little bit better than Lawson is right now, but Tuesday night he was on a different plane. And, A.J. scored 12, but that was on 3 of 15 shooting. A lot of those came off threes and then some free throws. But Nembhard, man, I walked out of that game and I was like, okay, he is NBA good. Like, this guy can ball. And sometimes a guy gets hot against you, and there's not much you can do. And South Carolina had a really hard time, whoever they put on him, whether it was Jair Bolden, whether that was A.J. Lawson or whoever, and keeping him in front. And he was able to get some line drives to the basket. He was able to come off screens and hit threes. And when guys are doing that, it's hard to beat them. And then, of course, 10 assists don't hurt his case either. Right.
Well, and the thing about that, and especially with the 10 assists, he just looked so in control at all times. And that was one thing. A.J. Lawson seems to drift in and out of games. And, his style of play, and we talked about this, I think, maybe the first podcast we recorded, it's not necessarily a bad thing that you don't always notice A.J. Like, if he can get to 18 and 6 without you really noticing, that's kind of a good point for his game, because it's not super demonstrative, and he does a lot of what he does very quietly. But I just could not take my eyes off of Nembhard. He was the quintessential floor general Tuesday night, and it was so impressive. He seriously, I don't even know if he blinked. I was sitting pretty close to the floor. I'm not sure if he blinked the entire night. He just looked completely in command, and he was, happy. And, part of this, you give Mike White credit for basically scheming it up like this. But Nembhard was just like, okay, Jair Bolden, A.J. Lawson, doesn't matter who's guarding me. I'm just going to call a pick and roll, and I'm going to get whatever look I want, wherever I want it, whether it's driving to the basket, whether it's stepping back for 3. And Carolina did such a poor job defensively guarding the pick and roll whenever Nembhard was running the pick and roll. I mean, there were a couple of times where guys just died on screens, and it's like, oh, gosh, you should just miss the shot just because you probably feel bad for the defender that just died on that screen. It was really ugly at times.
Yeah, and I know this is a Carolina podcast. So we probably spent the first 5 minutes talking about Nembhard, but their ball screen defense on him, on really everybody, wasn't great. And I mean, you picked that up early in the game, and they had trouble switching. And there was one point where A.J. Lawson was guarding Kerry Blackshear in the post, and Blackshear missed the shot.
I was going to say, I actually got a miss out of that.
Yeah, but like you don't want 6'6" A.J. Lawson guarding 6'11", arguably one of the best big men in the country.
And giving up probably 100 pounds.
Yeah, I mean, like, you don't want that. And they had some trouble with it, and it caused some matchup problems, and Florida converted a lot of those because they saw the matchup issue and they went straight at it. And South Carolina didn't really have an answer offensively because of a lot of turnovers. So it's one of those where they're easily fixable problems. They need to screen better. They need to get off screens better. They need to limit turnovers. But, you know, at this point, you kind of are what you are at some degree, and how much better you can get, I'm not sure at this point.
That we've talked about Nembhard so much in the early going is interesting, and I mentioned the case for, wow, based on the box score, it looks like Carolina would have won this game again based on Kotsar's performance and the free throw shooting. And if I told you that Kerry Blackshear was only going to play 20 minutes, he was going to be 11-5 with a turnover and 3 fouls, that seemed like the formula for success. We talked about, obviously, how good he is, how much of a threat he is, how much of Florida's offense runs through him. He got into foul trouble early in the first half, which I don't want to say was necessarily on purpose, but after he picked up that second foul, he was limping pretty significantly going back to the bench. So I wonder if he was just like, get me out of here.
Yep.
My foot hurts.
Save me for the second half.
Yeah, and then whatever they did to him at halftime certainly worked. I mean, he only shot 2 of 7 from the field, 7 of 10 from the free throw line. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it before. I mean, he's their Chris Silva. He gets fouled a lot. He fouls, a decent amount, and he makes a lot of his free throws. It was kind of fortunate for Carolina that he actually missed 3 of them.
Yeah, but he hit under his season average.
Right, because he's what 80% or so?
88, something like that.
88. Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Great free throw shooter. Carolina actually got a couple misses out of him, but all those things combined to, wow, this is a game that South Carolina should have won. But the flip side of that is at halftime when they're down by 3, you're like, wow, you're getting a great performance out of Kotsar. You're making all your free throws. Blackshear didn't play at all hardly, but 3 minutes probably in the first half, or
I think it was 2 or 3.
Yeah, 2 or 3 minutes in the first half.
Same as Trey Hannibal.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh, yeah, and we're going to get to that. But it was just everything kind of set up for Carolina to win this game, and it just wasn't enough. And for me, the difference was Nembhard. And I guess if we want to spin it back to Carolina, because I guess this is a Carolina basketball podcast, it was just continued underwhelming performances from South Carolina's backcourt. We talked about it. Defensively, Bolden and Lawson shooting a combined 7 of 29. This is 2 games in a row now for Bolden after the 22 against Virginia. That's like, okay, well, what was that Virginia game? That's seeming more like an outlier. It felt like, okay, maybe the Stetson game's an outlier. He's not going to be 22 a game like he was against Virginia, but maybe he's like 12 to 14 a game. Now it's looking more and more like that Virginia game. The Virginia game was an outlier, and Lawson's inconsistent performances continue, and I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, I mean, I think Frank's searching for the answer, too. When you win the front court matchup that you were hoping to win with Kerry Blackshear not playing as well as Mike Kotsar, and you got some decent production from a Levesque, a Frank.
McCreary getting back in the game for the first time since Houston.
McCreary playing bull in a china shop kind of basketball. I think he hit both of his free throws. Yeah,
he did.
Both of his free throws, which is...
They hit the rafters and then hit the bottom of the net.
Yeah, and I mean, hey, if it bounces around, it goes in, it goes in. But you need, and Frank said it in the postgame, you need the guards to set the tone for the game. And when A.J. Lawson and Jair Bolden are scoring, but they're doing it inefficiently, then it hurts your basketball team, and it really doesn't set a great tone. And when Andrew Nembhard is going off and hitting 8 of 14, and just playing like that, you lose the backcourt matchup, and it's hard to come back from that because the guards set the tone for everything. I agree with Frank on that. And if you're not getting what you want there, then it hurts. And I think I said it right after the game. They're struggling to keep guys in front of them, and it's impacting their offensive game and vice versa. So it's kind of snowballing is not the right word, but you're getting kind of some residual effects of poor play on both sides.
And it was especially disappointing given that Lawson did start the game well. I think he hit his first 2 shots or 2 of his first 3 shots maybe. But
that
those
3 in
corner
the corner
threes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all 3 of his shots that he made on Tuesday night were corner threes. 3 of 15 did he shoot, including 4 turnovers. How many assists did he have? 3 assists, 4 turnovers, so not good for his ratio. I think on the season he's like exactly 1-to-1 or pretty close to that. Right. But you get off to a hot start offensively, does AJ. 1, you're not able to keep it going offensively, and 2, you're not able to keep it going defensively. Now, one of the curious subplots of this season, especially the last couple weeks, has been Frank's, I don't even want to say frustration with AJ because it makes sense. He should be frustrated with AJ, who is supposed to be your best player and is not playing like that. But he has shown and again, this isn't totally uncharacteristic for Frank, but I've been surprised with how short AJ's leash has gotten, and I wonder if that is starting to affect him psychologically. Like, I'm just someone in general, like if I were a coach, if it's my best player, I'm going to let him play through some of those mistakes. But Frank pulled him 2 or 3 times in this game, seemingly after a mistake, and again, you can't really blame him for that because he's not playing well. Clearly, he needs some kind of adjustment, whether it's psychological, whether it's something that he's actually doing schematically that he just needs to work on, that he's not thinking about, lazy turnovers, whatever it is. But on the other hand, I mean, he did play 34 minutes, so it was, pretty brief stints that he got pulled out. But I can't figure out what the disconnect is between those two guys, and I'm wondering, I don't know. I'm just looking for an answer because AJ feels like he's regressed from last year, and I don't have an explanation for it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what you saw from Chris Silva at the start of his senior year, where there's so much pressure on him to perform, to be the leader, to do a little bit of everything, that instead of doing 1 or 2 things really well, he's doing 5 or 6 things not as good, as mediocre. And I think he's playing point, which is maybe not his natural position, but right now South Carolina doesn't really have an established point guard, so you have to kind of play your best player there. So he's kind of trying to grow into a role quickly, and it's not worked maybe as well as they'd hoped. Like I said, it's kind of similar to what Chris Silva was last year, where he's trying to grow into something instead of just being really good at 2 or 3 things. So time comes, I think AJ Lawson grows into it, but right now there's some growing pains involved. I think he's feeling the pressure of, hey, I was predicted to be a top 30 pick in the NBA draft. I need to live up to this. I need to be putting up 30 a night. And it's hard to do when you're putting so much pressure on yourself to succeed, and you're going into games knowing 1 or 2 mistakes and I'm getting yanked for 3-4 minutes. Mm-hmm. So there's some added pressure there. There's there's a lot of outlying factors with AJ, and his game's been good but not great to start.
He's a swing 2-3, and you're right. He's being asked to play the point, and not that the offense shouldn't run through him, but I think it's different running the offense through him as the 1 and having him guard 1s versus having him running the offense through him, but at the 2 or 3. South Carolina started the season with Jair Bolden running the point. That didn't work, and we gave Frank credit for moving Jair Bolden to a little more off the ball position, and it worked seemingly for a couple games. Not so much the last couple games, but I think that's eventually where he's more comfortable. And I think, AJ Lawson's a better ball handler than Jair, so that makes sense. But one of the other things that you and I have teased out is just wondering how much Jermaine Couisnard could factor in terms of he and Lawson both sharing the court together. Obviously, it wasn't a factor on Tuesday. He's out with a back injury. I think still considered questionable for Saturday's game against Tennessee. So we'll really have to wait and see on that. But that feels like it could be the next move, the next possible solution in terms of getting AJ out of that primary ball handler responsibility. Couisnard, as we talked about, has shown so much playmaking potential this year. I think he leads South Carolina in average assists per game, like 3.5 or 4, somewhere in the neighborhood. He needs to get back because the other part of that equation, not even so much getting the ball out of AJ's hands, but when Couisnard's not in there, I'll tell you what's for sure not the answer to solving South Carolina's backcourt problem, and it's TJ Moss playing 13, 15 minutes a game. He continues to underwhelm me. He seems like a very, very low-impact player. He's afraid to shoot, and when he does shoot, he doesn't shoot well. He's 13 of 52 on the season, right at 25%. He took 1 shot. He did make it on Tuesday. But Couisnard for sure needs to be playing the minutes over Moss. I know there's still some questions maybe about his defense, but again, his playmaking ability and his shooting upside and his willingness to shoot gives you a lot. And on Tuesday, obviously the other big storyline was, why is TJ Moss playing all these minutes that it seems like would be better suited for Trey Hannibal? And for that, there's no answer. And Frank Martin doesn't seem interested in discussing it either.
Yeah, and with TJ, it's just he's a turnover liability right now. He's got a turnover rate of 28.3, and the next closest guy is, Trey Hannibal's is up there at 27.9. But Trey Hannibal gives you some stuff that TJ Moss doesn't, and Frank doesn't really want to talk about it. I'll give Frank a little bit of benefit of the doubt. We're not in practice with him. We don't see what Trey's like on a day-to-day basis. We just see him in 3 to 4 minute spurts that are obviously, amazing. He came in for 2 minutes, had 4 points and a steal, and never played again. So that's frustrating from the fan perspective. I get it. But like I said, we're not in there day-to-day with him. If it were me, and granted I'm not getting paid $3 million to coach this basketball team, I'd play Trey probably 10 to 15 10 to 18 minutes per game, and just kind of let him grow and let him kind of mature on the court and then see how it relates to practice. But, if he's not practicing well, or, Frank's big on if you don't practice well, you're not going to play. And so it's just one of those things where we're not in there day to day to see what it's like.
No, and I understand, but there's some guys you turn the lights on and they perform.
Yeah, no,
and Trey does that. TJ Moss, again, he's a low impact player. He's turning the ball over. He'll have a couple assists here and there just because he's always got the ball in his hands, but he provides you no scoring upside. So I think, like, best case scenario, he is a net neutral. He's a net zero player. I'm stealing the stat from the piece you had. It was maybe not your instant reaction, but your what did we learn from Florida piece on Gamecock Central. Over the last 5 games, TJ Moss minus 19.
Yeah.
I mean, that's you can say that's a flawed stat. It's not a perfect stat. There are problems with it. That includes the Houston game where South Carolina lost by 20, where he played a lot of minutes in that. So that's obviously going to hurt his overall plus minus. But, at some point, he's just not that much of an impact player. And Frank Martin said, he's a high IQ player. He knows where to be. At some point, when you're playing as an underdog, which South Carolina was to Florida, which they're going to be against Tennessee, which they're going to be against Auburn.
Majority of SEC teams, yeah.
Except for like Texas A&M and Vanderbilt, and even Texas A&M had an outstanding defensive performance against Ole Miss the other night. When you're playing as an underdog, you need more variance, and Trey Hannibal provides that. And the thing that's most frustrating, again, to go back to when you turn the lights on, some guys just perform. I don't care what he looks like in practice. I know maybe that makes Frank Martin a little more hesitant to take him off the bench in the first place and just put him in the game at all. But when he gets in there, it's a small sample size, but 2 minutes, 4 points, a steal, and he jumped about 45 feet in the air to grab that steal and then throw in the most acrobatic layup that anybody finished the entire game. Right. Incredibly impressive. Gives energy to the team. Energy in the Colonial Life Arena. Fans are going crazy for it because it was exciting. And then he doesn't see the floor again in the second half. He was the best player in the Stetson game. He played well and did the exact same thing against Virginia. So it's not even like he gets in the game, he does something awesome, and then he does something stupid, or picks up too many fouls or whatever. You mentioned his turnover rate's high. I mean, he didn't have a turnover on Tuesday. I don't know if he had any against Stetson. It would be one thing if he were practicing poorly, he gets in the game, he does some exciting stuff, and then he does some stuff that hurts the team. But in the last 3 games, he's basically been nothing but positive for this team.
Yeah, and I think that with a guy as talented as Trey is and as good as Trey Hannibal is, you live with some of the turnovers. You live with some of the mental mistakes on either end of the floor because he's a freshman. But you keep him in there because, he's made some plays that, you didn't see from guys. Keyshawn Bryant's probably the only other guy that's as athletic.
I was going to say, he's Keyshawn Bryant. He's defensive Keyshawn Bryant.
Yeah, that's exactly
in terms of just like, wow.
Yeah, and it's fun to watch, and it brings some energy to a team that needs energy a lot. Frank Martin's talked about it. They need someone to step up and be kind of that leader. And like you saw it with Dwayne Notice, you saw it with Sandarius Thornwell. Those guys were forced to play as freshmen, and they made their fair share of mistakes. And South Carolina wasn't a good team with them as freshmen. But as they got into their junior year, they won 25 games. And their senior year, as Sandarius Thornwell, their junior year, Dwayne Notice was 6th man of the year. And their senior year, Sandarius Thornwell was SEC Player of the Year, and they went to a Final Four. So the growing pains pay off if a guy sticks around and stays in the program. And if you can get Trey Hannibal to be there for 3 or 4 years and you play him as a freshman, that only lends dividends. And I don't know what he's like in practice. We don't get the opportunity to see him, but what you see in games certainly lends itself to believe he should be playing more minutes.
Yeah, well, and the other thing that's interesting is one of the things that I really appreciate about Frank Martin is he's very honest about his players. He'll be very honest about his team. We had a great week of practice this week. We had a terrible week of practice this week. This guy's playing well right now. This guy's not. It would not be unusual for Frank to come to the podium and be like, if you ask him, hey, why didn't Trey Hannibal play more? Be like, well, he hasn't been good in practice. We've heard Frank say that. Yeah. He says that. So the fact that he chooses not to say anything makes it even more puzzling. It makes me, I don't know if it makes me more concerned, less concerned, because I don't know what the deal is, but he has no qualms about making a specific criticism about a player, and not even in a meme way, just be like, oh, well, he's just not playing well right now. He's not practicing well. He's not doing this. He's not doing that. We know it's nothing disciplinary. Nothing related to his grades, nothing like that. It's just he just doesn't seem interested. And I don't remember Frank acting this way about a player, but I'm sure there's guys that he is, avoided talking about for whatever reason. But I don't know. This one seems really unusual. I wonder, I don't know. Did they go to Frank's house for a cookout before the season, and he kicked his dog or something?
It's weird because I think that's a lot of where this frustration stems from, is the fact that he's being so coy about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when, like you said, he's never been shy about saying, hey, this guy's, he might be good in the games, but he's not good in practice, or he's dealing with some stuff that we need to focus on. And, I'm not going to play a guy who's not been good at practice. But the fact that he doesn't want to talk about Trey Hannibal, I think fans are frustrated about. If Frank Martin came out and gave an explanation for it, fans can either take it or leave it, and then you're done with it. But the fact that you don't really have an answer right now is puzzling. And I think if Trey Hannibal continues to not play as much as fans want, then that frustration is going to start boiling over. I mean, it already was at Colonial Life. I mean, where the media said, I'm listening to people scream about Trey Hannibal being put back in the game. So fans want to see him, and I don't know how much they will unless, Frank has a change of heart and wants to play a guy that he hadn't really necessarily shown interest in playing these last. I mean, you look at his minutes played, before the Clemson game, his high was 18 against Wichita State, but he hadn't played in 3 games already. He played 8 minutes against Cleveland State, 6 against Boston, 4 against Northern Iowa, 7 against George Washington, didn't play against UMass, didn't play against Houston, 16 against Clemson, they won, 7 against Virginia, they won. Stetson, he played 19, was best player on the court, and then 2 against Florida. And I think I looked at a stat, and it's not to pile on TJ Moss, but their 2 biggest wins of the year, Clemson and Virginia, he played a combined 8 minutes. So it's one of those where it's like, and Trey Hannibal played, if I'm looking at it correctly, played 23. So you look at that and you compare it and say, what's the biggest difference? Jair Bolden's one of those, but your bench played well in both of those games too, and that's in large part because Trey Hannibal was out there.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned this too, just this team so desperately lacks energy and lacks confidence and lacks an edge. Frank Martin has called them front runners. It's like you need, and this is a word that you use to describe Trey Hannibal, I think independent of this conversation, but what you need is that bulldog mentality. Mm-hmm. Frank made the comparison to Dwayne Notice in terms of a guy that wasn't necessarily vocal, like wasn't by any means necessarily the leader of the team, but you always knew he was out there. He was always playing hard. That seems like a fair comp in terms of body type, in terms of literally
mentality. Everything about him. Yeah,
everything about him. I mean, he
Dwayne was a better 3-point shooter, but Trey's a better dunker.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
He's got more balance to him.
It's just it's really disappointing and it's really confusing. I don't necessarily think that that's going to change. I just don't have any reason to think that it will. And so at this point, you probably expect to see more of the same on Saturday against Tennessee. In which case, if you're a Carolina fan, I think the best thing you can hope for is that Couisnard's not out too long with this back injury, because you want him to be taking more of those bench backcourt minutes, because he just provides, if nothing else. I know his in that same stat that you mentioned in your piece, his box plus minus Couisnard's over the last 5 games wasn't much better than Moss's. I think minus 15 or minus 16, but he at least gives you a scoring upside, which Moss doesn't give you, and you need that if you're Carolina.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. I mean, if I'm doing my math correct, the last 4 games leading up to the Florida game, which he didn't play in, obviously, he was minus 15 against Houston, plus 4 against Clemson, plus 1 against Virginia, and then negative 3 or minus 3 against Stetson. And that's not a great game-by-game basis, because obviously you lost 2 of those, so those are going to be negative.
Right. But a huge part of that is the minus in the Houston game.
Yeah.
Which everyone, they just got run off the floor.
Good. Yeah. But you need Jermaine Couisnard in there, and you need a guy that can give you some playmaking ability. He's top 250 in assist rate in the country, so he has some natural playmaking ability. He hasn't shot the ball really that well, but he's still averaging close to 9 points a game. So he just gives you kind of that, like we talked about with Trey, that bulldog mentality where he's just going to go out there and grind his way to 9 points and 4 rebounds, and you kind of know what you're going to get. The variance isn't there for him. You kind of know what you're going to get night in and night out from Jermaine, whereas Trey Hannibal could come out there and give you, we've talked a lot about Trey Hannibal being really good, but he can come out and give you 10, or he can go out there and turn the ball over 4 times, commit 2 fouls, and be done. Same with TJ Moss. So you need a guy with some consistency like Trey, or like Jermaine Couisnard out there, and it really shores up your guard rotation when you have him.
My reverse jinx on Frank did not work. 10 minutes, 0 points, got blocked a couple of times, right?
Yeah, not a good outing for
it was really disappointing. I think I was too harsh in my framing of the reverse jinx. So this is going to be, we're going to have to refine this process. Who was yours, by the way?
Ooh, I think I said Jair.
Jair? Okay.
No. Did I say AJ?
I can't remember.
I might have said AJ.
You maybe said AJ. It was not a good night for our reverse jinxes.
No,
we're gonna have to. We're
very inefficient night for our reverse
jinxes.
jinxes.
Really. We're gonna have to refine our process. It was a good night for Keyshawn Bryant. Had 14 for 3 assists. A couple of those were absolute dimes. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
That's the other really frustrating part about watching the game on Tuesday and watching this team all season is you see flashes where you're like, whoa, like you really still believe. I still believe in the talent of this team, in the upside of this team. Because you know how good AJ can be because of the flashes that he showed last year and the flashes that he shows this year. You see what Jerry Bolden can do when his shot's falling, like he did against Virginia. You know what Keyshawn Bryant can do. Mike Kotsar, he had the 18 and 10. He's been really he's probably what, like 10 and 6, 10 and 6.5 this year.
That's about right.
Like having a really, really nice senior year, and you know what he can do defensively. 2 steals in the first couple possessions in that Florida game really kind of set the tone early in terms of South Carolina being in the game. Kusnard, we know what he can do just sort of in flashes. Like all of the pieces are there. It's just an inability to put together, which is why, quick note here, I saw this yesterday. I don't remember what book this is, so I'll have to go back and double check it. But right now, today, Thursday, January 9th at 9:30 a.m., I think this is still a thing. If you want to win $30,000 on the University of South Carolina men's basketball team, all you have to do is place a small $100 bet on the Gamecocks to win the National Invitation Tournament. They're plus 30,000 to win the NIT right now, which, I mean, like, again, they're not, it doesn't look like they're trending towards making postseason play, but if they put it together, just miss the tournament, make the NIT, again, the upside of this team is there that it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world if they ended up winning the NIT. Plus 30,000. That's a lot.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, I'm not telling you should place a bet on that.
For entertainment purposes only, yeah.
Yeah, well, and also because literally last podcast I said it will be a consistent theme that I will tell you not to bet on this basketball team,
Yeah.
but I was staggered at those odds. I mean, $100, even if you just want to bet $50, you can win $15K. Who couldn't use an extra $15K in their pocket?
That's fair.
Oh, man, that's, I'm tempted, but I won't be that tempted. Yeah, not a good outing, but you still saw the glimpses. You saw the potential that is there, and right now, Florida's just better. I mean, Andrew Nimhard, fantastic, legit. It was fun to watch. He wasn't even really on my radar as necessarily like an NBA guy. I don't know what his prospects were in terms of the NBA draft, where he was projected to get drafted. If he was projected to get drafted after this season. He's a sophomore, right? Yeah. So I don't know what it was going into the season, but if he turns out a few more performances like that, he's definitely going to be getting some looks from NBA types because he's just he was a better Canadian on Tuesday.
Yeah.
If South Carolina is going to win the NIT or may even make the NIT, they're going to have to start winning some games.
So we're already hanging banners up at Colonial Life at this point in the season.
I know, right? They're going to have to start winning some games, and that's going to have to get turned around on Saturday. Going to Knoxville to take on Tennessee. Tennessee, who I didn't get a chance to watch it. I was sort of keeping up with it because obviously I was in the arena with you watching the Carolina-Florida game. Looked like they were hanging tight with Missouri. I mean, that was a close game for most of it. They pulled away 1 by 10, but I mean, it was within a 3-point game with about 6 minutes to go. Tennessee, a little bit underwhelming. Obviously, they lost their SEC opener as well, and they've had a kind of a weird season. It's impressive that they have made it to 9-5, I think.
Yes.
Given what they lost last year, obviously Jordan Bone and Admiral Schofield and Grant Williams, and then even just a couple of games ago, lost Lamonte Turner for the season, dealing with shoulder issues that are going to basically end his college career, which is really unfortunate for a guy that was really good. And they've been digging deep into their bench. One of the fun stories for Tennessee, I guess if you're a Tennessee fan, has been the emergence of Santiago Vescovi.
Yeah.
He's got such a cool name. He's from Uruguay or something like somewhere in South America. And in his first game, I think he's only played 2 games. Yeah, he's only played 2 games.
It's been a wild 2 games.
Yeah, well, and his first game just absolutely filling up the stat sheet. Scored like 15 points, had a bunch of crazy dimes.
Also had 9 turnovers.
Yeah, and 9 turnovers.
Amazing.
Yeah, exactly. He did like the Euro thing or like the South American thing where you come in and your game's a little bit unconventional compared to the American game. I remember when Zach Lowe was writing a big piece about Manu Ginobili. Maybe the year that he retired or the year before he retired, something like that. The way that he described Manu's game is that he plays in between the dribbles, which is to say sort of off rhythm. I think that was a really cool way to describe it. That's something that, I think you saw just in flashes from Vescovi with all the turnovers and the fun assists. There was one that was like, he's like going out of bounds and like threw kind of like behind the back.
Yeah, it's like
no look.
Weird. Like, it's weird. I'm looking at his stats right now. In his first game, he shot 0 for 4 from 2, 6 of 9 from 3, had 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 9 turnovers, 3 fouls. Like, it's amazing. And then obviously goes out against Missouri, scores 12, shoots 3 of 4 from the field, 4 for 5 from free throw line, 5 turnovers, 2 assists. I mean, this dude's wild. And you have no idea what you're going to get.
Yeah, I mean, talk about variance. He is like the epitome of variance, and that's what Tennessee needs because, again, you're already trying to replace a lot of what you lost last year. Lamonte Turner, who is going to be one of your best players, if not your best player going into the season, is not going to be there at all for SEC play, which is good news for Carolina fans. But Tennessee has still managed to they've gotten to 9-5. Their losses, they lost to Florida State, obviously a pretty good team. They lost to Memphis, pretty good team. They lost to Cincinnati. They lost to Wisconsin, and they lost to LSU. So, a handful of really quality losses in there. As I mentioned, getting the win against Missouri on the road. Not like necessarily a team of world beaters, but still getting a double-digit win on the road in the SEC. And defensively, they've been fantastic. They're allowing fewer than 60 points a game, which does not bode well for a South Carolina team that they scored 68 against Florida, but still don't feel great about their half-court offense, especially if AJ and Jair aren't shooting the ball a little bit more efficiently. Right now, ESPN's BPI says Tennessee has an 85% chance to win the game. That seems a little bit high for me.
Ken Palm's at 81.
81?
So I think it's kind of that same.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That seems high.
No confidence in South Carolina.
This is a weird Tennessee team, but I mean, they're definitely
really
not
good defensively.
They're really good defensively,
really good
but
defensive.
Oh man, I don't know. I feel better about this than I felt about the Florida game for sure. And that was a game that, like you said, was kind of in the balance until about 5 minutes to go.
It's just one of those where it's like, you're going on the road for the first time in the SEC with a young team, and who knows what you're going to get because I don't think South Carolina knows what they're going to get from their team.
No. Well, the one thing that you know is they played well on the road this year.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that is the teams that they've played, but obviously Virginia's excellent.
And Clemson.
Yeah, although Virginia losing to Boston College Tuesday night as well. I think if you're a Carolina fan, you're worried about that quad one win sliding into quad two.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, which would be bad news. But obviously, at that point, that's behind South Carolina. All they can do is worry about what's in front of them. What else? Obviously, good defensive team, as we mentioned a couple times, just good team defensive team. What else should Carolina be looking for, game planning for Tennessee?
Yeah. So, I mean, Tennessee's not – they're not at the offensive level they've been at the last few years with Admiral Schofield, with Bone, with Grant Williams. They're still top 100, scoring 105.1 points per 100 possessions. But what's really kept them in games and helped them win 9 has been their defense. I mean, you look at it, they're top 40. They're 37th nationally in defensive efficiency. Their effective field goal percentage against is 30th. I mean, their 2-point percentage against is 41.1%. So teams are shooting 41% from inside the 3-point line, which is really, really good for Tennessee. South Carolina has almost 60% of their points coming from inside the 3-point line, which is a lot.
And leaving a lot of points on the table inside the 3-point arc, too. I mean, they've missed a lot of bunnies all season. They missed a lot of bunnies against Florida, whether it's just like missed layups. There's that one sequence where Carolina got like 3 offensive rebounds because they just missed a bunch of putbacks in a row. Those are baskets. I mean, you always need those baskets. I don't know if that would have made a difference in the Florida game, but that will almost certainly be the difference in the Tennessee game, which will probably also be much more low scoring than the Florida game.
Yeah, I mean, and Frank's talked about it. They've had trouble scoring at the rim lately, and Tennessee packs the rim. They have a really good block percentage against. They force some turnovers. They do a lot of things well, and defensively speaking, inside. And it's going to be an interesting matchup because they're going to probably key on Mike Kotsar and say, okay, we're going to make A.J. Lawson shoot the ball. We're going to make Jair Bolden shoot the ball, and we're going to make your other bigs play well against us. And if they beat us, then so be it. But if not, then we're going to make sure we're going to take your best option away and force you to shoot the ball. If I was a team playing South Carolina right now, I don't think I would do anything but a 2-3 zone, where I'm saying if you're going to beat us, you're going to have to hit 7 or 8 threes to do it.
That's probably a good bet. One of the things that I think probably we could have foreseen being an issue for Carolina, but didn't, because I think we were all expecting a little more productivity out of their backcourt, is the lack of any true post option. We know Mike Kotsar wasn't going to be that guy. Levesque and McCreary are good energy guys. You can count on them, I guess, theoretically, to go get some offensive rebounds, some putbacks, but mostly it's like rebounding and defense. They're not anyone you're going to dump the ball to in the post and just let them go to work. That's pretty much only Frank, and with the backcourt now struggling, the post touches have become a little bit more important. And we talked about this heading into the Florida game. It was a game that you felt like, okay, this is Frank's opportunity, because you feel like they're going to need something like that. This feels like a similar game from that respect. So if it's not Frank, then who is it? Now, again, Kotsar's done a little bit better, but he's done a lot of his damage catching the ball at the elbow, either popping that jumper. We saw him have a couple drives, one where he missed a bunny. It felt like he should have just dunked it.
Just dunk it, dude.
I know. I think that's why he missed it. It looked like he was going up for the dunk, and he was like, I don't want to miss the dunk, and then he tried to switch to like a little finger roll to lay it in.
Fade away,
weird, which was a bummer.
You can't see me doing it but like it's this weird fade away thing that he did, and it was bad.
Yeah, it was bad, and he missed, and that felt like a big momentum swing, frankly, for Carolina. But
that was in like a 2 or 3 point game, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It was close.
It was. I don't remember exactly what the score was.
USC was on a run.
Yeah. So it was unfortunate timing. So that to say, like, he's been good. He's been good at scoring. Obviously, it's not like he's out there shooting a lot of threes, so he's getting it done, from in the paint. But it's not, traditionally back to the basket. But if he's not attacking that way, which you can't count on necessarily every game, then it's got to be Frank or McCreary or Levesque. But again, they're not the kind of guys that you're necessarily giving post touches to. So it's Carolina's kind of in a bind, and to go back to basically where we started this, it all all these issues are being generated from the fact that they're not getting enough productive scoring from their guards.
Yeah, and I think this is a game where you're going to kind of wish Micaiah Henry had developed a little bit more in the non-con, because you could use a guy with that size and that strength out there.
Is it too late to bring him back into the rotation? I know he's played, 2 games this year?
I mean,
maybe
not
3?
really too late, but it's just one of those where if he had developed, he'd be playing right now. Just because you don't have another post option outside of Kotsar, you need something, and he just hasn't gotten it for you yet. So you need, I'm not getting paid $3 million to coach this basketball team, but if I'm Frank Martin, or if I'm developing the game plan for this, I'm playing 1 in, 4 out, and spacing the floor and driving, because A.J. Lawson's really good at drawing fouls and shooting free throws. And I think you want to turn this into a free throw shooting game, because Tennessee they're not great, but they're a decent shooting team. They turn the ball over a lot, but they're shooting 33% from 3, which is pretty okay. They're shooting 50% from 2, which is, again, just okay. And they're shooting 74% from the free throw line. So if you can force Tennessee, if you don't foul, and if you can get to the free throw line, you feel pretty good about your chances to win this basketball game. Kind of.
And I'm wondering kind of what that means for Carolina defensively, because with the 4 out 1 in, you wonder who that is. If it's Kotsar, you feel pretty good. If it's Levesque, you feel pretty good just in terms of like defensive mobility. Pretty good on switches, rim protection, things like that. But then you're kind of losing that offensively. So I'm wondering if they do go that route, or could this even be a game where you see Carolina go, really, really small? I don't know. If you don't feel good about your ability to get inside and get those post touches, you put an extra shooter out there. Maybe you widen those driving lanes just a little bit, put one more shooter out there just to increase your odds, because I don't know what Carolina's shooting from 3 on the season, but I'm guessing it's low 30s.
You're being generous.
Okay.
It's high 20s.
High
28.5%, which is 331st in the nation out of 55 teams.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. Well, which is, I don't want to say it's weird, because at this point we have enough of a sample size to say that maybe these guys just aren't good shooters.
Yeah.
But it's not like any of these guys shoot and I'm going, no.
Yeah.
Like when AJ lets it fly, I'm like, that could go in. When Jair lets it fly, that could go in. Manaya,
they've shown flashes of doing that. I think that's the frustrating part for them, for us just watching, and for fans, because you're like, you've shown the ability to hit 3 or 4 of these in a game, but then you go 1 for 7, and that's, I think, the frustrating part for a lot of people.
Oh, man, too many problems with this team and not enough answers, and just the flashes make it all the more frustrating. Tennessee really good defensively, probably a low-scoring game. So if Carolina is able to win this, pull off the upset, I don't know what the line on this is going to be. I imagine similar to Florida, 4 or 5, 6 point game, something like that. If Carolina is able to pull off the upset, we're thinking it's going to be 58-54.
I felt better about the Florida game, than the Tennessee game.
Oh, really?
Just because you're at home, the matchup works a little bit better with, Blackshear and Kotsar, but they have Josiah James, and they have this, Santiago Vescovi guy that
You
you
just
have
hope that
no
he has
idea about.
a 9-turnover game and get you 18 transition points.
Yeah, and I mean, you got to play fast. Fast offensively, slow Tennessee down. You got to make sure that Tennessee can't get their defense set. And if you can attack them in spots where they're not fully set, then great. And then you need to clean up on the offensive glass, which they did not do against Florida.
Or the defensive glass.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not hitting shots, they shot like 38%, I want to say. That means you're missing a lot of shots. And you need to be a better offensive rebounding team. You need Justin Minaya. They didn't get a lot from Justin Minaya against Florida because of foul trouble in the first half. And then second half, he was just okay. You need Bryant, you need Minaya, and you need Mike Kotsar to go out there and rebound the ball on the offensive glass. And they just haven't been able to do that as consistently as they want to this year.
I feel better about the Tennessee game than I did the Florida game for the same reason that I felt better about the Virginia game than the Florida game. I don't even know if it's fair to say Tennessee's as limited offensively as Virginia, because we saw it again against Boston College. Like, that team just can't get to 60.
Yeah.
Can Virginia? Now Tennessee's scoring a little bit better than that, but offensively they're averaging, I think, like right at 67 points a game, which is worse than South Carolina right now. I just feel better about, given South Carolina's lack of shooting, given their general propensity to miss free throws, although that was not the case against Florida. Hopefully that marks a turning point. I'm not necessarily counting on it because I think you and I both agree you kind of are what you are in terms of your ability to knock down free throws. But I just feel better about Carolina in a low-scoring game. Well, maybe it's not even fair to say. I just feel worse about Carolina in a high-scoring game than I do in a low-scoring game. And given that we've seen them, win a big low-scoring game on the road against Virginia, I feel a little bit better about it. And there's also something to, I was wondering, if you're a Carolina fan watching that Tennessee-Missouri game on Saturday, who are you pulling for? Do you want Tennessee to be downtrodden 0-2 in the SEC, or are you more afraid of them being 0-2 back at home with their backs against the wall, feeling a little bit desperate? I feel like this is a little bit make or break for South Carolina. You and I mentioned it's a tough stretch. You can probably survive a 2-3 start, but 0-2, still having to go to Kentucky, Auburn and obviously play Kentucky on Wednesday. This is a backs against the wall kind of game, and if Carolina doesn't respond, if they don't step up, come out with sort of a newfound energy, if they look deflated, I think that might sort of be that might seal like 6-12.
Yeah, and it's hard to say you're in the danger zone this early in the season, but if you get to 0-2 and you still have two teams that are in the top 25 that have chances to be Sweet 16 or Elite 8 or even Final Four teams in Kentucky and Auburn, things really aren't good for you. You could start 1-4, or if you slip up against A&M because you're looking ahead or looking behind you, you could be 1-4 or 0-5. You're so far behind the 8 ball, you can't see the 8 ball. I mean,
right.
It's one of those where you need to get 2 wins in your next 4 games to feel good about your chances to get to 500, if not better, in the SEC. But if not, I mean, there really aren't that many games you go into and say this is a surefire win for South Carolina after that. There are not many right now.
No.
And if you lose to Tennessee, then there's even fewer than that right now.
Yeah, there's no gimme wins for this team the way they're playing. Obviously, you lose to Stetson, you can't guarantee a win against anybody. The closest you're going to get to that, like I said earlier, are Vanderbilt and A&M. Unfortunately, your first trip to A&M, you have to go to College Station. That is 4 games from now. That's their 5th game of SEC play. So you put that in the WCOM because you absolutely have to. And again, if you were going to shoot for the low end of what we projected was possible and reasonable for this team in terms of making some sort of postseason play, you have to win one of these next 3 games. 2 of them are on the road, Auburn and obviously this game against Tennessee, and then the home game against Kentucky. And, watching Kentucky and Georgia after the Carolina game, I mean, Georgia looked really good in the first half. They went on a really impressive run to end the first half, and then Kentucky just came roaring back in the second half, won that by, it was either 9 or 11. I don't remember if it was 78-69 or 79-68. They won it. They kind of won it going away towards the end of that
by
game.
9 points, yeah. 78-69.
78-69, yeah. So they looked really good.
Yes.
Obviously,
NBA talent.
Yeah. Oh, everywhere. I mean, Carolina's shown variance, and it's at home, and Carolina's beaten Kentucky when Kentucky was probably even better than this Kentucky team was, so you never count that out, but you're also not counting on that. So you look at, I mean, really this Tennessee game, because as you mentioned, Auburn, might be the best team in the SEC right now.
Who knows at this point? Kentucky, Auburn, Arkansas, take your pick at this point. I mean,
so this is backs against the wall. Really find out a lot about this team. Kind of pull out all the stops. Not to harp on like the Moss Hannibal thing, but when I talked about variance, when I talked about Carolina needing that in scenarios where they're underdogs, it's funny that Frank Martin has criticized his team. I said this on my local show yesterday, so sorry if this is redundant for any of you that were listening to that. Frank Martin criticized his team for being front runners, but I feel like his insistence on playing Moss over Hannibal demonstrates his own front runner mentality, because when you have someone like that, again, Moss offers very little upside. He's just kind of a safe, neutral player. Even though he has a high turnover rate, I think like theoretically, at least what he provides defensively in terms of not being out of position, in terms of not making some mental mistakes that maybe some of the younger players like Hannibal are prone to make, it feels like just a safe, neutral kind of selection going with him off the bench, and that's a front runner mentality. You can't just play guys that are net neutral when you're trying to pull off an upset. Again, even if it's a marginal upset, you need someone that gives you a little more upside, even if you risk having a little more downside. It's like an onside kick or going for two or something like that. And this
calculated risk.
Yeah, it has to be a calculated risk. So for Frank, I think it's got to be more Hannibal minutes. I think you got to get really creative with your lineups. I mentioned earlier, maybe this is where we see South Carolina go really small. We still see him experimenting with lineups. There was one lineup that he played Tuesday night, and I don't remember offhand what it was, but I was like, this is probably the first time this lineup has ever played. So he's still getting creative, trying to just find combinations that work, which is in some ways a luxury, because you have the guys that you feel like you can tinker with some of those things, and also really frustrating because you don't have a lot of lineups that necessarily have continuity. I think you mentioned the lineup that's played the most for South Carolina this year is the starting lineup, and that's only been like 10% of the total minutes played or something like that.
So much.
Yeah, so it's unbelievable. So you wonder, does he get a little more creative? Obviously, I don't expect the starting lineup to change, but do you go like extra small? Do you play extra big? You have some options. This is, for me, kind of a pull all the stops out kind of game. So it's at 1 o'clock on Saturday. I don't know. You feel worse about the Florida game. You feel worse about the Tennessee game than the Florida game. I feel a little bit better. We're going to learn a lot about this team on Saturday,
yes,
and that's going to dictate, I think, how much fun these podcasts are to do for the rest of the basketball season in a lot of ways. Our reverse jinxes were bad on Tuesday. Do we reverse jinx ourselves, or do we just try again?
I say we give it one more shot. Give it a college try.
All right.
You can go first this time.
Okay, I'll go
I
first.
went first last time.
I think he started the season great. He kind of disappeared. He struggled with foul trouble. He's a theoretical shooter. He shot well most of his South Carolina career. Hasn't exactly found his stroke this year, except in a couple of big moments. He's someone that doesn't get a lot of talk in terms of being a leader. Although he is a veteran on this team, he's a veteran presence and is really key to most of South Carolina's interesting defensive lineups because of his versatility, because he can be like a swing 3, 4, or 5. I think this is a big Justin Minaya game. I don't know if A.J. Lawson can handle the spotlight. He hasn't for most of this year. Mike Kotsar has been remarkably consistent. I just can't expect anything out of Jair Bolden. He's too up and down. This feels like a game where Frank Martin says, Justin, you've been around this program for a while. I need a little extra from you. Go out there and win this basketball game for us. And he says, oh, Captain, my captain. 18-11 like the opener. Was it 18-11 in the opener?
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
I was getting worried there because the way you were talking, I was like, damn it, I hope he doesn't take mine.
Oh, no.
All right.
Yeah, this feels like this needs to be a Minaya game, just a steadying presence.
17-11 in his first
17-11?
Yes. Started the season so well.
I know.
Forget how good.
And then just disappeared. But he can do that.
Yeah.
And I mean, think about how people talked about him before he got hurt. He was
glue. He's the ultimate glue guy.
Yeah, he's the ultimate glue guy. And this is the game where the glue guy has to make a difference.
Yeah. All right. So mine, a guy that's been good but not great, coming off his best game of the year against Florida, hasn't really clicked. He's missed a couple big plays, missed a few alley-oops, missed a few things here or there. But I'm going to go Keyshawn Bryant. This is a guy that, because you remember his last year, these Tennessee games really exposed how far away he was from competing with a guy like Admiral Schofield. And this was always the game Frank Martin used to inspire him to say, this is a chance to go up against the best wing in the SEC. No Admiral Schofield. This is Keyshawn Bryant's chance to go out there and prove how far he's come in a year, to prove he's healthy, and I think he's going to go for, let's say, 18-8 with a few monster dunks, including one that will spark a big run that South Carolina wins with.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a prediction.
Yeah.
And also just adding to Keyshawn Bryant's resume, which again, it's been an okay season for him. Obviously missed a lot of time. And then since he's been back, it's been mostly up and down, but did play well against Florida. And I mentioned this earlier too, but I just love the playmaking ability that he flashed. He threw a couple passes that I was like, was that Keyshawn? Like, not that I thought he was a bad passer, but he's normally the one just like attacking and finishing.
Yeah.
But he's really sharp and got a good feel for the game.
That one to Minaya in the first half under the basket where he like literally throws it past a Florida player was beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, that was an NBA pass.
Yes.
Now we just got to do that 7 times a game or something.
Yeah, if only.
Yeah, if only. All right, there we go. There's our reverse jinxes. Hopefully we do better than we did against Florida. I'm going to cast a little baby reverse jinx on ourselves for screwing it up last time. And
you were awful. Yeah. Terrible.
It's all right. It's all right. We can't get them right all the time. Before we get out of here, you and Wes and Chris and everyone at GamecockCentral.com had a lot of fun before the new year doing the all-decade teams. Obviously, as we headed into a new decade, I talked about the football team, the all-decade team with Wes and Chris yesterday. And shout out to Wes. I mentioned this on the podcast yesterday, and y'all should go listen to it if you haven't. And if you haven't, it's probably because you're not subscribed to the Gamecock Central Podcast Network, in which case go hit subscribe right now so you don't miss any of that. But shout out to Wes for pointing out that Donnell Stanley is the only person that deserves to be on the all-decade football team for South Carolina because he was the only player that played all-decade.
Yeah, I mean,
because he's like 40. He's played like 10 years. Didn't necessarily have that with the all-decade men's basketball team, although you made a note that threw me off a little bit because Wes was texting me about this while y'all were working on it, and I cast one of my votes for the all-decade guard for Devin Downey because he played into the 2010 season, and you said that doesn't count.
That was one that I struggled with. Now, direct all your angry tweets at me. I ultimately chose not to include that half season in 2010 as part of the all-decade team, which ultimately left Devin Downey off of it. If we were going to include that half season, Devin Downey would be 1A, 1B, 1C. I mean, he was legit for all of it.
Right. So if Devin Downey were on this team, and real quick, just to run down this was actually an aggregate of everybody on Gamecock Central voting. So you can tell me if you differed on this too, but as presently constituted, and you can check this out on GamecockCentral.com, guards, P.J. Dozier and A.J. Lawson, wings, and Darius Thornwell, forwards, this is actually a split vote. Chris Silva and Sam Muldrow / Michael Carrera got the same amount of votes. Did you have any differences in those? Or rather, who did you cast your pick for the other forward?
I think I put Muldrow as my other one and Carrera coming off the bench. Muldrow was he was SEC Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, rim protector. He was pretty much Chris Silva before Chris Silva.
He had Carolina's last triple-double.
Yeah.
With blocks.
I mean, he was legit.
So, if Devin Downey had been eligible, would you have replaced A.J. Lawson or P.J.?
You got to replace A.J. Lawson.
Yeah.
Just because he only played one season in the decade. Still my freshman of the decade by far. But, yeah, I mean, Devin was Devin, and then PJ was he wasn't great his freshman year, but he was consistent. And then obviously his sophomore year, the tournament run he went on, it's hard not to include him in that.
Yeah,
mix.
that was an interesting year because obviously Sindarius Thornwell missed whatever it was, 6 or 7 games, and PJ really held it down. He was scoring like 22 or 25 a game while Sindarius was gone. And then Sindarius came back, and his production took a little bit of a hit, obviously played well in the tournament, and then I think left a little bit of a bad taste in Carolina fans' mouths, leaving a little bit earlier than people thought he should, especially when you think about what the team the year after he left could have been if only they had a steadying presence at point guard rather than the Sonny Gravett experiment all season long.
In the Rotfelder whole thing with that.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, it was unfortunate the way that it ended. I'm glad that he did get the nod here, I guess, over Downey, even though Downey wasn't eligible, just because I think he was a better player than people.
And I will say that hurt me to not include him.
I know. That was really unfortunate.
Played 18 games in the year.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if you just look at like productivity over the course of the decade, just the 18 games puts them at a little bit of a disadvantage. 3 guys coming off the bench. You went Bruce Ellington, Dwayne Notice, Brenton Williams. Other receiving votes, Ty Johnson, Sam Muldrow, A.J. Lawson, Rakeem Felder, P.J. Dozier. No votes for Frank Booker? Yeah. It was just the 1 year, but it was a heck of a year.
Frank Booker never really cropped into my head as you don't think about him. I think that just based off the team he played on where they think they went 7-11 in conference play. He didn't play all that well. He had a great year, but it was just one of those where if you're not on a great team, it's hard to really stand out. Love Frank to death. Was a great interview. I mean, still chat every now and again, but yeah, I don't know if I would include him on the all-decade. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, my bench was Bruce, Ellington, Dwayne Notice, and Michael Carrera.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, that's a good one. That would make sense because he split with the, like I mentioned, split with the starting forward, so he was not necessarily in the bench category, but that's a pretty good one. A couple of these that were no-brainers. Coach of the decade, Frank Martin. Duh. Freshman of the decade, AJ Lawson.
I think that was unanimous.
AJ Lawson votes none.
Yeah.
Defensive player of the decade, Chris Silva. Dwayne Notice also did receive some votes, but that one seems like a no-brainer. Sixth man of the decade. There's a little bit of discussion here, and I'm saving the most discussion for last. Sixth man of the decade, Dwayne Notice got the vote. Was that your vote?
Yes, I voted for Dwayne. Or no, I voted for Chris Silva.
For sixth man of the decade?
Oh, sixth man, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I voted Dwayne Notice. That was easy. I think Hassani got some votes.
Yeah, Hassani got some votes. I think that's an interesting case. I think Dwayne deserves it, but I would be curious to see what the voting breakdown was.
Yeah, I think
because Hassani
was
in
like
that
all
role
but one got Hassani got one vote.
Okay.
If I'm remembering correctly, because I compiled all that. But he was the guy that I think if I was going to put, if you got 2 votes for sixth man of the year, then Hassani's probably right up there. But Dwayne just did it at such a high level for so long. It was such a key piece for 2 of the best teams in program history, that 25 and then the Final 4-year team. So it's hard not to put him up there. And Hassani was great, but Hassani was a role player for 1 year, was not good 1 year, and then was obviously became really, really good his senior year.
Right.
So
so I'm not arguing with that. By
no,
the way, my vote
that's just the
100%.
rationale for how I voted.
I
I completely
100%
understand why you would put Hassani in that mix.
Well, but I mean, in the mix though. But I would for sure vote for Dwayne. But Hassani, sort of like PJ, it's like the one bad year he had when Frank Martin was trying to go square peg in a round hole, make him the point guard. I think colored people's expectation of him because again, really good as a sixth man, and then his senior year was really, really good, really productive. He shoot like 40% from 3 that year.
It was amazing.
It was fantastic, and obviously sixth man of the year in the SEC.
Yeah, and he's still playing professional ball. He's with the Magic right now, or with their G League, D League team, whatever it is now.
So, the most interesting one, and others receiving votes in this category was none, which is disappointing. Player of the decade, Sindarius Thornwell.
How's that interesting?
So here, I'm just going to read the blurb from GamecockCentral.com. Again, a pretty easy no-brainer. Thornwell was the best player to come through the program in a very long time, and he's still playing professionally. He was SEC Player of the Year as a senior and was one of the more decorated players under Frank Martin, and was also the East Regional Most Outstanding Player during the Gamecocks' Final Four run. I'm not saying that Sindarius Thornwell should not have been the Player of the Decade, but I'm insulted that Chris Silva did not receive any votes, especially when you consider the narrative, the entirety of his career, how raw he was starting out, and the fact that he became, we knew that he was going to be good defensively, but became an offensive fulcrum for this team. Twice was SEC all-defensive team. I think first team 1 year, second team the other. He was SEC co-defensive player of the year his junior year, and for whatever this is worth, is having the most productive pro career of any South Carolina player since Ronaldo Balkman.
You make some compelling arguments.
I don't know if the pro argument should factor into this or not, but he is my favorite South Carolina basketball player ever, is Chris Silva.
That's fair. And I think that he got Defensive Player of the Decade. But when I sat down to vote, it was when I think about South Carolina basketball, these from the back half of 2010, not Devin Downey, please don't angry tweet me.
Don't add him.
Yeah. Into the end of 2019, who do I think of? And that person was Sindarius Thornwell. And that person was him sitting on the floor at Bon Secours Wellness Center screaming at the Duke game. I mean, when South Carolina basketball's one shining moment plays, who's the most featured player on that one shining moment? And it's Sindarius Thornwell. And
as it says right here, East Regional Most Outstanding Player during the Final Four run. I mean, it's hard to argue with that. I feel like it should have been like 70-30.
Okay.
Or 80-20. There should have been an acknowledgement for Chris Silva. I can't believe nobody voted for him, just for posterity.
I mean, it's just like, but Sindarius is such a no-brainer. He's South Carolina basketball's one shining moment.
I'm glad that he won it. He deserves to win it. I just want to see more Chris Silva love is all. But anyway, that's the team of the decade. This was
if we're gonna put most fun people to cover, it's Chris Silva. Chris Silva was a fun basketball player to cover because he was so honest, and when you're talking to him kind of outside of basketball, he's hilarious. So if we're going to pick favorites to cover, it probably Chris Silva and probably Hassani. So those are the two.
Well, and I mentioned some of his accolades, but I also forgot to mention, and I don't know how I forgot to mention this, I should never forget this, is the NCAA's all-time foul leader. There's something to be said for that.
No. Hang a banner.
I think he got that like either the last or the second to last game of the season.
Came down to the wire.
Yeah, it was impressive. It looked like he was easy on pace, and then he slowed it down, which was great news for Frank Martin, bad news for me, probably neutral for everybody else. I was really rooting for it. I remember talking about it like the day before he did it, and Tommy Moody was very upset. He was like, that's a very dubious distinction. You should not be gunning for that. You should not be pulling for him to get that. And I was like, no. This is
South Carolina's going to get a record holder. Let them have a record holder.
Just one, and you just got to hope that no one breaks that. But anyway, that is on GamecockCentral.com. Check it out. Collyn wrote it, and the entire Gamecock Central staff worked on it. If y'all disagree, I think this one was a little bit easier than the football one. It was a good decade for men's basketball, but not the best. Yeah. Whereas football, that was the best decade ever in the history of South Carolina football. Yeah. So I think not a lot of hairs to split necessarily on this list.
Baseball was by far the hardest.
Baseball, golly. Yeah, I can't even do that. I can't even start. All I know is Matt Price was the best, and I took a lot of flack for that, for saying he was the player of the decade.
Mike Roth's the GOAT.
Everybody said Mike Roth.
Mike Roth's the GOAT.
Matt Price was the best closer in college baseball for 2 years.
And Mike Roth was the best pitcher in college baseball for 2 years.
But closers are cool. Closers are cool.
Closers are pretty badass.
Just ice in his veins. Didn't matter what the situation was. The amount of jams that he got out of, obviously closing out both of those national championship clinching games. Struck out like 15,000 people in 2 years, I think was the number.
Blake Cooper doesn't get enough credit for what he did in 2010. I know we're just kind of bouncing all over the place, but I mean, some of the stories, like Blake Cooper's arm was dead for that UCLA game where he went out and pitched 8 innings in 2010. I mean, dead. And I think he pitched the entire College World Series with a broken non-throwing hand.
Oh, wow. I don't think I knew that.
Yeah. I mean, that dude was nails. And he deserves, I think I voted for him as one of my decade pitchers just for that reason, because he was so tough. He broke it against Coastal. Foul ball into the dugout. He went to go pick one up and it hit his hand. He got fouled off into there. And
the Christian Walker game. That's Jay's vote for player of the decade. Jay Phillips.
I think I voted JBJ, but Christian Walker is my freshman of the decade.
Yeah. I mean, JBJ, Christian Walker, Michael Roth, Matt Price. Like, that could have been like 25, 25, and 25. Or 25, 25, 25, and 25 in terms of splitting the vote.
And, like, the stories you hear about Christian, the one that I was really bummed to leave off the list for baseball was Adrian Morales.
Yeah.
I think LB Dantzler had better stats. I think Jonah Bride was better defensively. But Adrian hit like 280, but every hit was in like a big moment.
Yeah.
And like
he was the glue guy.
Oh, well, like when you look up glue guy in the dictionary, it's Adrian Morales.
It's just a picture of that beard.
Yeah. Like, I mean, just the stories you hear about him with, I mean, getting in Christian Walker's face when he broke his hamate bone in 11. There's the general, I mean, Texas A&M in 11 when Mike Roth gives up 4 runs in the first inning and Adrian Morales corners him in the dugout and goes no more runs, and Mike Roth goes out and throws like 6 shutout innings after that. Like, I mean, it's just, I mean, Adrian Morales is the stuff of legends. And I mean, Christian Walker sleeping with his hand taped up to the bed to stop blood flow to his broken hand so the swelling could go down. I mean, there were some stories from those 10 and 11 years that are just, I mean, golden.
Incredible. And you did the oral history of the 10
I did the 20, all 3, the 11, 10, 11, 12.
You did all of them. Okay. Yeah.
The 22-game win streak.
Yeah, that was last summer or last baseball season or something. Yeah. So if y'all missed that, it is, I mean, obviously an evergreen story. That's also on GamecockCentral.com. Yeah. So much good stuff to go check out. Seriously, plugs. Go check out all these all-decade teams. It's been about a week, but we're still, pretty fresh in the new year. So go check them out. Let us know. What did we get wrong? I mean, not me. I didn't cast any votes. I talked to Wes about it in an unofficial capacity, but let us know if we're crazy.
Please angry tweet Wes and Chris and not me.
Yeah. And angry tweet me too. I want to hear all the people that are angry that I think Matt Price is the baseball player of the decade and that Chris Silva should have gotten at least 20% of the votes for basketball player of the decade. But this is a lot of fun. Great decade for all of South Carolina athletics. Again, not the best necessarily like individually for basketball, but the best for football, best for baseball, best for women's basketball. I think all across the South Carolina athletics department, the 2010s were great.
Yes,
hope as someone that covers this team, I think both of us would like for this decade to be at least as good or even better, because it's just a lot more fun when the team we're covering is doing well. So
we get less angry tweets, less angry posts on the message.
Yeah. Now some of the angry tweets and angry calls, whatever, are good, but it's bad when the apathy sets in, like happened with the football team last year, and like is maybe in danger of happening with the basketball team should they lay an egg on Saturday against Tennessee. We will be back on Tuesday to discuss whatever the heck happens in that game and then preview the Kentucky game. So thank you all so much for listening. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe if you like this. Check out another Carolina podcast. Wes, Chris, and I are back on that. And a lot of good stuff going on right now. Spring football is right around the corner. Obviously, National Signing Day for football is right around the corner, and basketball season is well underway. So plenty of stuff on GamecockCentral.com and the Gamecock Central Podcast Network. Thank you all so much for listening. For Collyn, I'm Pearson. We'll talk to you next Tuesday.